Hello, I'm Tim Curtis, Town Manager for the town of Madison, and I'm joined here today by Danielle Denis with Somerset Public Health. And what we'd like to do over the next few minutes is provide some general education about where the town of Madison stands in regards to recreational marijuana. So, right now, the law allows for cultivation, manufacturing, testing, and that's a big deal because to get more money for your marijuana product, it has to pass a certain amount of tests, and that was a big part of this law. They wanted to have testing facilities so that the quality of the product could be monitored. So that could be a whole nother branch industry, is folks that might want to set up a testing facility. Then you have the retail sales, which can take on many different forms. And then this social club, a marijuana social club. People will hear about that and scratch their head, what is that? And in fact, of all the states that have legalized marijuana for recreational, only one other state other than Maine included the social club language, and that was Alaska. And to date, Alaska has not granted a social club license to anyone because either there's been no interest in it or no one really knows how it works. So we're kind of on the cutting edge with this idea of social clubs. My understanding from reading the law and talking to others is it would kind of be like the coffee shop of marijuana, where you could go in and use marijuana at that facility and you could purchase some to go home with. That's my limited understanding of a social club.
So the idea and the concept of the social club, I don't know as though it came out of Colorado, but it's something that Colorado has addressed because, like Maine, even though it's recreationally legal, you cannot consume it in public places. So you can't go to the park and use one of the fire pits and cook your hot dogs and be passing around a bowl or a joint or whatever. It has to be consumed in your private home that you own. Vehicles, not so much. That's kind of one of those gray areas still at this time, but it's likely that language will be included in the enforcement. So there, and for Colorado, which is a huge tourist resort communities, there was no place for the people that were coming into town to ski, but to also use their recreational marijuana. There was no place for them to be able to legally use it. So it was causing problems within the resorts, the hotel rooms, and so that was posing some public concern. So the idea of these social clubs came about so that people who were coming from out of town who wanted to use the marijuana, their marijuana that they purchased legally in that state for recreational purposes, would have a place to do so. And so I get it, but I also see the concern from the public health standpoint that within this law, whatever you purchase within these social clubs must be purchased or must be consumed on site. So you're not walking out with anything. And there's also language that prohibits the sale of alcohol or any other, I think food even. The only thing that they're allowed to sell at these social clubs would be recreational marijuana. And
so you could partake of the recreational marijuana product in the social club, but you couldn't order a drink, alcoholic drink, to go along with it. So that's a prohibition that's in the law currently. So now this gets down to the towns and what does each town want. And like you had referred to earlier, the law does give a lot of home rule to each town. And as we've come through the town meeting season, we've already seen some towns around us take action. The town of Starks passed a prohibition ordinance, and so my understanding is they are going to prohibit any cultivation, manufacturing, testing, retail, or social clubs in town of Starks. You can chuckle all you want about the Starks' reputation, but that's something that they voted, and it was a fairly overwhelming vote. It was like 70-30 at their town meeting. I know the town of Skowhegan has been looking at prohibition language. Of course, here in Madison, we have a moratorium that's actually overshadowed by the state's moratorium, but we haven't drafted any ordinances in regards to prohibition. That kind of gets us back to the purpose of the Marijuana Education Committee that you and I both serve on with several other folks. And after our first initial meeting, the kind of the purpose was, well, instead of trying to craft some legislation that we really don't know what direction the state's going to go in, let's spend some time and energy educating the public. So that's what we're hoping to do in these few minutes. When voters in Madison go to cast their votes in June for our local elections, this is where you vote for school board members, selectmen, that sort of thing. We hope to have a survey there. So this will be actually, we can't technically put it on the ballot, but you can have it handed to you with your ballot if you choose as a Madison resident to fill it out. That would certainly help the town to try to determine which way to go. Now, we're still working out the bugs in this, but basically this is what we've come up with as a committee so far. The question would be simply this: what would you like to see regarding retail marijuana regulation in Madison? And you're given three options. Option A is no regulation other than what is currently required for business development. In other words, treat marijuana businesses just like barbershops and any other business. Whatever regulations there are for them, keep it the same, so no additional regulation for marijuana use. Option B is regulations that limit the number and the location of retail marijuana businesses. Maybe you don't want them right across from the junior high. Maybe you don't want 11 social clubs in town. So maybe regulation that would address that. And then third is regulation that would prohibit all types of retail marijuana within the town. Now, I realize that doesn't cover all of the questions, but I think that's a good starting point, or at least we can get input from what the people are looking for in Madison.
And it would certainly be helpful if beyond the no regulation, they chose one of those other ones that within the comments that if it was, well, maybe cultivation center isn't so bad, but I don't want retail.
Right.
Or how that looks. So the comments, I think, will be, for people who would like to participate and put those in, those would be very helpful.
So is it your understanding that of these 5 different license classes, a municipality can develop their own ordinance that says no retail, no social clubs, but we're okay if you have a cultivation facility, a testing facility, or a manufacturing facility? So you kind of can pick and choose from these 5 classes which that you want in your town, which you'd rather not have in your town.
Yeah. However the ordinance gets worded, whether it's a total prohibition, like some of the other towns, Norwalk, Starks, Canaan, or if it's a partial prohibition of retail, or how that looks. That's all really within the scope of the town to decide.
And I'd like to take this opportunity to say the thing that I always say when people ask this question. Backyard Farms grows tomatoes, and they have no intention of not growing tomatoes. They have no intentions of growing marijuana at that greenhouse. Could it change in the future? Certainly. But their current board of directors has rejected that idea. So don't always believe what you may hear or see. However, I will say the new owner of the Madison paper facility has been approached to use some of that large warehouse space to grow recreational marijuana. That's not a done deal. That's just one of the proposals that I'm aware of, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see more proposals like that as people are ramping up toward a large-scale recreational marijuana cultivation or manufacturing site.
And again, looking at locations, there are certain things that are federally legal. So as long as those grow facilities are within that, I think it's 1,000 feet of a school, if they are within that 1,000 feet of the school, then that does become federal domain. So growers would be opening themselves up to certainly the possibility of DEA coming in, because that is one of those sale or growing of a Schedule I drug within school limits. So I would point that out as we move forward.
And I think part probably one of the last things I just want to touch on is a couple of questions that always seem to come up. What about impaired driving? And currently, from what I've heard, there really isn't anything put together on that yet. There's really no test. There's nothing out there that is like a breathalyzer for blood alcohol content, partly because of the way marijuana is absorbed into the system, and partly because it's just, I'm sure an officer will still use their discretion to look for signs of impairment. And a person can be impaired not just for alcohol. They can be impaired if their blood sugar is low. They can be impaired for a wide variety of reasons. So I think that police officers and law enforcement will still be able to use judgment, but there's no legal limit test.
There's no legal limit test in there, and there is, so there's 4 levels of OUI training that a law enforcement agent can get. They get their first 2 in their, what I would call their basic training, the academy. And then the step 3 and step 4, step 3 is what they call ARIDE, Advanced Recognition. I don't remember all the acronyms. But it's a couple of day training, and it trains the officers to be able to, using various fine motor skill tests and eye, and looking at kind of your nervous system response, the classification of drug that you are impaired on, if they believe that you are. Without that training, they really don't have the ability to get something to stick in a court of law. So that's kind of some of the conversation also that's going on at the state in looking at this, is that how do we get our officers the training that they need to be able to enforce an impaired driving. But certainly if somebody is out there and they are demonstrating signs of impairment, swerving over the lines, speeding, any number of those things, any reason for an officer to pull you over, and they do have that training, then there's certainly the ability to prosecute.
The other question that comes up is, well, we passed this law so we could tax it. And I think there was a lot of concern over this from both sides of the issue. And I know there were a lot of medical marijuana growers and users that voted against question 1 because they were concerned of how it was going to impact them on the other side to get the medicine that they needed. From a purely capitalistic perspective, well, if they're going to grow it and they're going to sell it, let's at least tax it and take revenue from it. In this law, interestingly enough, the tax is set at what some people consider to be a rather low level. The tax rate set in law is 10%. By comparison, the state of Washington is 37%. My understanding in Colorado is they have a 12% state tax, but then they allow municipalities to charge an excise tax, much like you do on your motor vehicle registrations and that sort of thing. Right now in Maine law, there is no way for a municipality to tax a retail product. So that throws a whole nother level of argument into the whole landscape of this marijuana issue.
Yes, yes, it certainly foggies or muddies the water, if you will.
So I guess the rule of thumb on taxation that I've heard is you want to raise enough money in taxation to at least help fund regulation, but you don't want to make the tax rate so high that you foster more black market. And in a culture like Central Maine, which already has an established market for marijuana use, this tax thing is probably going to be pretty hard for the legislature to get its hands around and for them to enforce. It's been nearly impossible to enforce state sales tax for items purchased on the internet, other than them kindly asking you when you fill out your Maine tax return. So I'm sure that it's going to be something that they're going to have to wrestle with more than just this coming year. So
yeah, and there's also the federal regulations around taxes, and I think what you'll find that in the medical field right now, that a lot of them are moving towards paying their sales tax and paying their federal taxes, because especially for medical marijuana growers, DEA is not the scariest three-letter acronym that you can throw at them. It's IRS.
Right.
So so they are trying to be as diligent and responsible as possible in fulfilling those obligations to both the state and the feds. But there's been a black market. I'm not sure if the slide was in the presentation. It was in the one that I heard, but I think not so long ago, marijuana was still considered Maine's #1 cash crop.
Sure.
Behind hay and something else, but it was like a landslide above both of the two that fell behind it. And so you're not going to change the attitudes of those people that have those beliefs. But certainly moving forward, I think that there will be some challenges, just like there are in any other cash industry. The bigger, getting back to the cash piece, the regulations with banks. And there are some banks, the bigger, help me out with some of the big ones, like TD Bank, the federal ones, Bank of America,
yep. Citibank.
Don't allow a person who is participating in this industry to have an account with them. Or, well, they will, but there's this, they'll just shut it down on you and they seize your money. And it's not very fun from what I've been told. So, that's something that the individual persons with these establishments will work through and figure out as they go.
Okay.
For sure.
Well, before we summarize here, anything else that you want to cover that we haven't covered today?
The canopy limits, maybe, just that there is the 800,000 square foot cap and what that actually looks like. If you break it down, there's two types of licenses, those over 3,000 square feet and up to 30,000 square feet, and those under 3,000 square feet. So those are the two types of licenses that they'll be allowing at the state level. And if you do the math with the stipulations that they put in, it works out to about 1 per county, and then 106 small grows, which those small grows, the preference will be given to those who have been registered with the state medical marijuana program for the last 2 years and are in good standing with their state sales tax and those types of things.
So this canopy kind of puts a limit on how many square feet in the state can be dedicated towards growing cannabis or growing marijuana. And that 800,000 square feet is a pretty low number when you consider all the room in the state to grow.
Yep.
Just by comparison, Backyard Farm uses 1.4 million square feet just to grow tomatoes. So they would exceed the cap. That's another reason why Backyard Farms is not growing marijuana. Well, great. Danielle, thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Very much. In summary, coming up in June at the local election, residents will have the opportunity to answer a short survey about what they would like to see regarding regulation on retail marijuana in Madison. The town of Madison's moratorium ends at the end of June, but the state moratorium on any retail marijuana products continues until February of 18. And that gives the town a little time to figure out what direction we want to go in. So we want to hear from you. We want to hear from residents in our area as to what direction they'd like to go in on this confusing at best topic. All right. Again, I'm Tim Curtis, Town Manager, Town of Madison. My guest today has been Danielle Denis from Somerset Public Health, and we thank you for watching.